Your childhood ended years ago, and yet it is in the room with you right now. It is in the way you responded to the last person who raised their voice near you. It is in the specific tightness you feel when someone says we need to talk. It is in fact that you can absorb a week of kind words and have them mean almost nothing, while a single careless remark from the right person lands and stays for days. You didn't choose any of that. You didn't build those responses as an adult, with full information and free will. They were built for you, slowly and invisibly, by a childhood that was over, before you had the language to understand what it was teaching you. Developmental psychology has one finding it returns to across decades of research. The patterns formed in childhood don't stay in childhood. They migrate. They show up in boardrooms and bedrooms, in the way you argue and the way you apologize, in what you reach for when you're overwhelmed, and what you do when someone offers you something you actually need. These are 9 of the most subtle ways your childhood is still shaping your present, not as memory, but as behavior. Not as something you remember, but as something you do. The first is the way you relate to anger, specifically, other people's anger, not your own. Picture walking into a room where 2 people are having a tense exchange. Nothing extreme, nothing violent, just raised voices and clipped words. And notice what happens in your body before your mind has even registered the content of what's being said. If your nervous system responds to other people's anger as though it were a personal threat, if irritation in someone else's voice activates something that feels like danger, that calibration was almost certainly set. In childhood, in households where adult anger reliably preceded something painful, the child's amygdala learned to treat the sound of anger as a warning signal that learning doesn't expire. The adult who flinches at someone else's frustration is not being oversensitive. They are being accurate to an older map. The second subtle way is in how you handle praise. You work hard. You produce something genuinely good. Someone acknowledges it, and something in you deflects, minimizes, or quietly waits for the other shoe. Compliments bounce. Criticism sticks. This asymmetry makes no logical sense to the adult experiencing it, and yet it is almost universal among people who grew up in households where positive feedback was either rare, conditional, or followed by something that negated it. The nervous system that learned to associate warmth with instability, warmth as the calm before something harder, protects itself by not fully receiving it. What looks like low self-esteem is often a finely tuned protective response to a pattern that no longer applies. The third way is the relationship with rest. Not tiredness rest. The experience of having nothing urgent to do and being unable to tolerate it. For a significant number of adults, stillness activates rather than soothes. The moment external demands quiet down, anxiety moves in to fill the space. This developed in households where the child's value was tied to usefulness, where being busy was safe and idle was dangerous. The adult who cannot rest without guilt, who fills every quiet moment with the next task, is often still living by a schedule imposed on them before they were old enough to set their own. The fourth way is in how you make decisions specifically, the degree to which you second-guess them. Research on decision-making and childhood environments shows a clear link between growing up in critical or unpredictable households and developing what psychologists call decision-making anxiety. The inability to commit to a choice without experiencing it as potentially catastrophic. The child whose judgment was frequently overridden or mocked learns their own assessments are unreliable. That learning becomes a habit of self-doubt, so deeply grooved it can feel like a personality trait. It is not. It is a wound that has been mistaken for a character. If this is landing somewhere in you right now, take a moment to like the video. It helps more people find conversations like this one. And if exploring the quieter psychological inheritances of childhood is something you want more of, subscribing makes that possible. The fifth subtle way is in the kind of people you are drawn toward in relationships. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and expanded by Mary Ainsworth, established that the attachment style formed in childhood becomes the template for every significant relationship that follows. Children who experienced inconsistent caregiving develop an anxious attachment style that seeks, in adulthood, relationships with a similar emotional texture. Not because chaos is pleasant, but because it is familiar, and familiarity is processed by the brain as a form of safety, even when its content is not. The adult who keeps finding themselves in urgent, unstable relationships is often selecting for the only kind of love they learn to recognize. The sixth way is in how you handle your own needs. Specifically, in how much difficulty you have admitting you have them. Think about the last time you needed something and asked for it directly, not hinted, not hoped, not waited to see if someone noticed, actually asked. For many adults, the direct expression of a need triggers something disproportionate: guilt, shame, a bracing for the response to land badly. This traces back to households where needs were met with resentment, where asking was costly, where the safest strategy was to need as little as possible and to manage silently whatever needs remained. The child who learned that needs are burdens becomes an adult who is extraordinarily self-sufficient and privately very alone. The seventh way is in your default response to conflict. Not the dramatic kind, the ordinary kind. A disagreement with a partner, a tension at work, a moment where your experience and someone else's don't match. If your instinct is to immediately accommodate, to smooth, to make the other person comfortable at the expense of your own account of what happened, that instinct was built. In households where conflict was either dangerous or permanently unresolved, the child learned that their version of events was negotiable, that maintaining the relationship required abandoning the truth of their own experience. The adult who struggles to hold their ground in conflict is not weak. They are following a rule that once kept the peace in a place where peace was fragile. The eighth way is in how you interpret silence. A friend doesn't reply to a message for a few hours. A partner goes quiet at dinner. A colleague responds with less warmth than usual. For adults who grew up in households where silence preceded something, where quiet meant a parent was angry, where the absence of communication was itself a form of punishment, the brain fills in the silence with threat. The interpretation is not random, it is trained. The adult who catastrophizes other people's silences is not being irrational. They are being faithful to a pattern that silence, in their formative experience, reliably confirmed. The ninth way is perhaps the most subtle of all. Your baseline expectation of how much difficulty life should involve. Every person carries an unconscious sense of what is normal, how much friction, how much effort is simply the standard cost of being alive. This baseline is set in childhood, in the emotional texture of the household you grew up in. People who grew up in households of chronic difficulty often arrive in adulthood unable to trust ease. When things go well, they wait. When life is not painful, they look for the hidden cost. Goodness feels borrowed. The stability feels temporary. Not because they are pessimistic by nature, but because ease was never what they were taught to expect. Here is what all 9 of these have in common. Not one of them is a character flaw. Not one of them is irrational when you trace it back to where it was built. Every single one of them is a piece of intelligence calibrated precisely by a young nervous system, doing the best possible job with the information it has. The flinch at anger was accurate once. The distrust of praise was earned. The inability to rest was adaptive. They are loyal, outdated instructions that have not yet been updated. Updating them is possible. It requires something many people who grew up in difficult childhoods find hard to access. The belief that a different calibration is available, that the map can be redrawn, that the instructions written before they had any say are not the final word on who they are allowed to become. My childhood is over, but the conversation with it doesn't have to be. Which of these 9 felt least like a coincidence? And when did you first notice it showing up somewhere it didn't belong? Something in this video landed because it was already true about you. Truth has a weight that coincidence doesn't. Hit the like and subscribe button. I'll see you in the next one.